Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. Thanks for joining me again. This week we're going to revisit that Motown and soul blues style that we love so much, but we're going to be looking at it from a rhythm playing point of view this time. So this study is going to be chock full of great chord voicings, lovely double stop moves and triads and Hendrixisms and Steve Cropperisms. So if that sounds like your sort of thing, buckle in and join me for the next 20 minutes. We're going to use the chord changes to Sam Cooke's iconic A Change Is Gonna Come as our template for this lesson. An amazing song with a beautiful chord progression, and just like the original, we'll be playing this in a key of B flat. Oh, and this is a long one, but do make sure to stick it out till the very end for some really tasty Bill Frisell style 2-5-1 tricks, as well as some good in-depth tone talk. The chord progression involves just a handful of basic chords, a B flat major, so that would be your 1, a C minor, that would be your 2, a G minor, that would be your 6, or your relative minor, and there's also a lovely turnaround, an E flat to a D7 to a G minor. That's something we've covered in a lot of the Tom Waits videos, you know, a sharp 5 to a 5 to a 1, in this case a 1 minor. And the bridge section involves a C7, which functions as a secondary dominant of F7, which would be the 5 of the 1 for the key of B flat major. Obviously we'll be looking at these things in much more depth as we make our way through the rhythm study. As always, my very thorough lesson materials, including backing track, will be available to download at the links in the description, so do check that out. I have a Patreon where you get access to all of my lessons plus tons of bonus stuff, or you can purchase this individual lesson at the Gumroad link. Okay, so let's dive in. This song is played in a 12/8 time signature, so that's this kind of a feel. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Very nice feel. Now it's really important when you're playing in that style to keep the hand bouncing. Notice how I'm keeping this 8th note bounce going all the time. That will really help you to stay tight in the pocket on this one. Oh, and also a quick disclaimer that as with all of my studies, whether it's lead or rhythm, there's a progression of difficulty throughout this. It starts easy, gets harder as it goes along. So we're starting off with a very simple B flat major bar chord at the 6th fret of the low E string. Make sure every note is coming through nice and clean, because we want to really get a good strong contrast between the bass side of the chord and the treble side of the chord. Now getting that command over the tonal shift between the bass and treble in your chord is not quite as easy as people think. That's going to be the blueprint of our rhythmic pattern throughout. Bass, treble, bass, bass, treble. When I say bass, I'm focusing on the 3 lower strings, sometimes the lower 2, or sometimes just the very lowest. And I'm also tending to palm mute as I strike. I'm not resting my palm here throughout, but I'm letting it fall onto the strings and dampening in the right hand there as I strike the strings. Then for the treble side of the chord, I'm hitting the top 3 strings quite aggressively with a flick. Make sure you go quite heavy on that. Again, you want that extreme contrast of tone between bass and treble. So that's exactly what we're going to play for the first bar. Then for the second bar, very similar, but with the addition of this run-in to the C minor chord that comes up next. That run-in was really just B flat major pentatonic, and then landing on the C minor, where we're going to form this full bar chord at the 8th fret. And again, make sure you can really get that contrast between bass and treble. Down to G minor, that little run, thinking C minor pentatonic, double stops on strings D and G at the 8th fret, hammering onto 10 on the D string, going back down the way you came, 10 on the A string, tie it into G minor. Make sure that when you do these double stops, that you take a leaf out of the Hendrix book, pick quite hard, try and pop through the 2 strings at once. Don't strum, but actually place the pick with a rest stroke behind the D string, so you can pop through with some real force. And on that G minor, we're going to do a very similar thing, using notes from a G minor pentatonic scale to form these double stops to take us back home to the B flat with our basic pattern again. Then we're heading to a C minor 7, where we just do the bass and the treble before moving to an E flat major with a C shape, and then a D7, also with a C kind of shape, back to the G minor bar chord. Now we're looking ahead to the next bar where we have a B flat, so we're going to walk up on the low E string. Very simple, G, A, B flat. Then on this B flat chord we're going to play a kind of mini turnaround where we go 1, 4, back to 1. So I kept the B flat in the bass and formed an E flat major triad, strings D, G and B, barring with the little finger at the 8th fret. And I called that the 4 because of course in the key of B flat, 1, 2, 3, 4 is your E flat. 1, 4, 1. Sounds especially cool, especially gospel, if you keep the root of the 1 in the bass the whole time. It gives it that sus sound. You'll hear that kind of stuff all of the time in this style. Like check this out, for example, B flat major triad, E flat major, F minor. Now if I use my looper to keep a B flat anchored down in the bass there, check out how cool that sounds. 2, 3, 4. Anyway, so that's what we're doing in bar number 8. You can do it with the thumb over or as a full chord. Really doesn't matter. Now for our second time round that same progression, we're just going to start filling in a little more. As I say, things get a little more intricate and involved as we go along. So we're kicking off with this B flat, where I'm really just hitting the lower bass strings, and then that same run from earlier, but this time landing in this sort of D-shaped B flat major chord in order to give us something to really stab at and slide away. And then we go back to our B flat chord where we really do have to do it thumb over Hendrix style this time, so that we have some digits spare to do all this fancy stuff. Thinking just the top 3 strings, double stop, hammer on into notes from a B flat major triad. And then another chord stab. Find a fingering that makes things sound smooth. Notice how I did it this way initially. But that involves then having to flatten the tip of that finger to bar the top string, which I know some people find difficult. It's worth trying to persevere with that stuff, but of course you could take the easy option and rebuild the shape. But you'll get that inevitable bit of silence between the transition if you do that, and it can sound a little jarring. Now we do a very similar thing, it's almost like a response to that, when we go to the C minor. And again, I'm using my thumb over at this point and playing this. More of those minor pentatonic double stops. Strings G and B, moving on to strings D and G, and then the top 3 strings with one of those nice sharp chord stabs. You could do that just with the bar chord in situ, and move that little finger around to find the notes. That works really well. Now we go down to G minor where we play. So again, all very similar stuff. G minor pentatonic scale as a way of finding double stops. It's more about rhythmic placement and playing it in the pocket with this stuff. Now to get back to B flat, rather than moving everything up to the 6th fret, we're going to go to a B flat major triad here in first inversion. Again, a very typical Hendrixy kind of sound. B flat, invert that bass note to the major 3rd, and you get this beautiful voicing. This, of course, is a portion of your G shape. If you've seen my caged lesson, you'll see that we spoke about that in quite a bit of depth, about simplifying that big awkward shape into just the middle 4 strings of it, which is where we can get this thing happening. So you've got G minor, resolving back to B flat, where you kind have to use your imagination, or the bass player, to get that B flat bass note. Now, not too dissimilar to when we went from the 1 to the 4 earlier in triad form, this time we're going to go from the 1 to the 2 and back. Similar kind of sound. It's a really pretty way of doing things. Just adds a very subtle bit of movement on the 1 chord. The 2 chord, in this case the C minor, is in first inversion here. And again, I'm using the tip of my second finger to bar strings G and D at the 5th fret, getting the minor 3rd here at the 6th fret of the A string on the 3rd finger. Very pretty sounding. Now remember that you don't need a C minor chord to be in the progression in order to be able to use that stuff. We're just using it simply to create movement on a static B flat major chord. In fact, it's worth practicing going through the entire scale with these kinds of things. For example, B flat major, C minor, D minor, E flat, F, G minor, A diminished, B flat. You could use any of those things. Easy ways to gain a bit of movement, and that's the strength of learning your harmonized major scales, of course, especially in triad form like that. Very grabbable. So back to bar number 13, we've got the B flat, that little movement, grab the root before going to a C minor 7 again, and then this time E flat 7 to D7 to the G minor. More of that minor pentatonic stuff, and then B flat. All we're doing there is using that same run we used earlier on, the major pentatonic, B flat major, through the scale to the root, same run, 1 octave higher. We're into our 3rd time round now, by the way, and we play this. So there we're using all the same tricks as before pretty much, Hendrixy B flat, getting a strong definition between the bass and the treble, using the little finger to hammer on to the 8th fret of the B string, and then these 6, where you've got the 8th fret of the G in the top E, sliding to the 10th fret, go back, and then part of your B flat major triad. You could play that as a 6th as well actually. I think maybe that's what I did on the initial performance. Or use the full triad, whatever you prefer. C minor, that's where we're connecting to. Thinking ahead to the G minor already, we're going to carve a line through the C minor pentatonic to get there. Now we're thinking of this G minor 7 chord shape here at the 10th fret of the A string. I'm going to hammer into this 2nd finger and then trace a little melody up on the top string. Fairly simple, but sounds really effective. So those 2 bars would be C minor, G minor. Then we're going back to the B flat, again Hendrix style, thumb over. And we can use fingers 2 and 3 to play the top 2 notes of this B flat major triad. That's how I'm thinking of it. Usually it would be the first 2 fingers, of course, but we're going to use the next 2 to make this next move a little easier. Slide down a whole tone, then grab on the same 2 strings the 3rd fret, which would be part of another B flat major triad. So it's like we're going from this inversion to this inversion, and then slide back in. Very effective. And then grab, just like before, let that 2nd finger kind of bend in to bar the top string, so you can get a nice stab on that full triad. Now the C minor 7 comes along. We're going to give it 2 slow hits where we go all the way through to the top E string, 3rd fret, then add the little finger to get the 6th fret. And then for the E flat chord, so far we've tried E flat major, E flat 7. Now we're going to push it one step further, E flat 9, so a dominant 7 with a 9 added. And then move everything down a semitone, but keep the top 2 strings where they were for your next chord. Fancy chord, right? That's like a D7 with a sharp 9 and a sharp 5. So it's very much like the Hendrix chord, but with a sharp 5 on top. And then resolves back to a G minor bar chord. Now on this G minor we're going to get a little bluesy. Back to the B flat. So all I did there, taking a 6th interval for a G minor triad here, isolating the G and the E strings and sliding in, and then use the blues note, thinking G minor blues scale, resolving to the B flat major via these 2 notes from a B flat major triad, 3rd fret of strings D and G. Then we're playing this, where we're recycling that lovely thing we spoke about earlier, B flat major, C minor, 1st inversion and back. Now we're heading to the B section, so this is where the progression changes quite a bit. We're starting this section with a C minor bar chord, and then using some of those double stops from a C minor pentatonic, sliding down and tying in to a B flat major chord. Make sure it's efficient like that, where that finger doesn't come off to reform the chord. It's very important that you can get used to building shapes around an existing note. I often notice people doing this kind of thing, where they would take it off and replant it from scratch as part of the chord. Obviously that just introduces an awkward space, whereas this of course sounds much cooler. You know, assembling the chord as and when you need it. So, rather than trying to just land everything at once all the time. Now on this B flat chord we're playing this really nice sus4 thing, which sounds a little country to me. Very simple, just moving that little finger to the 8th fret of the G string, hitting the top 3 strings, pulling off to the waiting 2nd finger, and then replanting that little finger and picking that note out. So that would be C minor, B flat. Then we do a very similar thing again, C minor, where we start to explore other things in and around the chord shape. Starting off with a C minor bar chord, we're going to then liberate these fingers, but keep the barring finger. You can hit the top 4 strings and hammer onto the 10th fret of the top E to get that really pretty C minor 9 sound. Then come down to the flat 7, and then back to the 8th fret of the B string under that barring finger. Then back to B flat, where we do exactly what we did last time. Then the C minor, where we do yet another trick. You'll have heard that a lot in my other videos. Something I picked up from listening to Barney Kessel many years ago. Now here's your C minor chord. Isolate the middle 2 strings. Take that root 2 frets above, so you're getting like a C minor 9, but unlike this one that sounded really pretty, suddenly this one sounds quite dissonant, and then walk down chromatically to the root. It's worth learning that move all over the place. You'll have seen me use it a lot in the Mark Ribot studies to create jarring dissonant spikes. B flat again, where we do just a very simple pattern before climbing chromatically with these dominant 7ths, B flat 7, B7, C7, where to be really specific, when we get to C7 we're going to do one of those bluesy hammer-ons. Take the 2nd finger away and just hammer it on very quickly once you've struck the chord. Now we're just going to explore what we can grab with the little finger within this shape. On the the B string in this case, 8th fret, 10th fret, 11th fret, ending up on the flat 7 there, 1 octave above where we already had it buried in the chord. Then again we use that very common trick of sixths, thinking just simply C major at this point, 2 notes from a C major triad or a C7 chord, either way. 2 notes on the 10th fret of the G and top E strings, back to the 2 notes from your initial chord shape on those strings. And then for the F7 that comes up next, we're grabbing F9 with one of my favourite voicings, again one I've used in a lot of my videos. This is one that I picked up from listening to Freddie King, from Hideaway. This of course would be 1 fret higher because that was an E9. This is F9. The root is on top, so you have the flat 7, the 9, the 3rd and the root. Sometimes you can hook your thumb if you want to grab the root down low as well, or remove the root on top and get that more mellow voicing. You often hear that in jazz. So there's our F9. Again, that's just like a fancy version of F7. Just to go back to the previous chord and explain the function for a moment. C7, of course, in the key of B flat, it should have been a C minor, as it was previously in the song. But here, C7 is acting as the 5 of F7. So it's what you call a secondary dominant. That's the 5 of 5, because F7 truly is the 5 in the key of B flat. And that's going to resolve us back home. So when we go C7, that's the 5 of F7. And then we're going to play, which again, if you've seen any of my other videos on country playing or soul playing, I've probably used that trick numerous times, where we're really thinking F6, walking down chromatically to become the top 3 strings of an F9. That kind of a thing. Very common in country music especially. It can be useful to think of that through the lens of relative minor. You know, in this case, F7, you can be thinking F major. The relative minor would be D minor. D minor triad on the top strings. There's one way of doing it. Walk it down chromatically a whole tone. Do it with the next inversion. And the next inversion. Check out my country lead playing videos for more in-depth discussion about that stuff. So if I just play through the last few bars of the B section to outline some of that interesting stuff that was going on. C minor, a bit of Barney Kessel dissonance, B flat, walking up, C7, F7. And that's going to resolve us back to B flat major to begin the final A section. And here is that final A section. We let things simmer down and simplify again for a little bit, just to let the groove really speak. But things then pick up again near the end. So here's what we have. B flat, pentatonic, C minor, G minor, pentatonic, B flat, and then C minor 7. We're going to play this fancy little thing. I stole that from Bill Frisell. Check out his version of this tune, it's stunning. There's a lot of ways we can look at this, so bear with me for a moment while we explore some options. So we're thinking E flat major 7, D7 altered, in this case sharp 9, and then G minor or G minor 7. Really nice. Now one way you could look at that is just simply through the lens of the original progression. E flat major to D7 to G minor has now become one step more fancy. E flat major 7 to D7 to G minor. But another nice way to look at it, and this is useful for playing jazz standards and things that are full of 2-5-1, is this is like a rootless voicing for an A minor 7 flat 5 kind of chord. So you're getting like a 2-5-1 in G minor there as well. Now just bear with me for a moment while I take this a step further. A minor 7 flat 5, if you put the flat 5 in the bass, so this note here, double it down in this lower octave, what you've got E flat major 6. So it's not too much of a stretch of the imagination to turn that into an E flat major 7. Now this is a common approach for lead playing as well. If you see an A minor 7 flat 5 chord, it can sound really good if you play an E flat major 7th arpeggio over it. And then of course to the D7, resolving to the G minor. Very sweet. And it's so worth exploring some of those options if you can get a chance. One final thing that could be worth exploring, and I toyed with the idea of doing this in this study, is instead of playing the D in the bass on the D7, tritone sub that, put an A flat in the bass, making this an A flat 13 chord. Sounds great. It just might be one step too much for this sort of style. Perhaps a little too aggressive to put something like that in the bass. Oh, now one other thing that I totally failed to mention there, on the E flat major 7, you take your third down a whole tone, giving you that sort of sus2 quality. Or major 9 would be another way to look at that. And then to close out this study, G minor 7, walk through the bass notes until you get to your B flat, and then to finish we're going to let things simmer down tempo wise, give it a loose feel, and play another thing that I took from Bill Frisell's version. These intervals are really cute sounding. You've got strings G and E, 5 and 6, 7 and 8, 8 and 10, and then a simple B flat major triad. Then hook the thumb to grab that bass note. Okay, so on to a bit of tone talk. This is my Gibson ES335. I've had this since brand new. I brought it in 2013 and it was part of a 50th anniversary. So this is a 63 reissue. Really nice guitar. Good sort of 60s taper neck. It starts off slimmish and then gets fatter as it goes along. The pickups are Sun Bear 59 PAF style pickups. They sound incredible, much better than the pickups that I had in there originally. I've been on the neck pickup the whole time here, and the strings are 11 gauge Diodario NYXLs. Pedal wise, I'm just plugged into a Brown Amps Carbon, which is a really nice light overdrive pedal. Doesn't change the EQ too much, maybe boosts the mids just very slightly. I have the gain set at about 10 o'clock and the level at noon, so it's just really adding a touch of breakup to the tone. And I'm plugged into my Emprise Falcon amp, and that's where I'm getting both the reverb and the trem from. The trem is proper tube bias trem, very similar to the Princeton circuit, and it's a beautiful sounding thing. This is all going out to the Universal Audio aux box, which then goes straight to my Apollo Twin interface and into Logic Pro. And I'm not sure if you're interested, but for the bass part, I used my Epiphone Jack Cassidy bass, DI'd straight into the interface, and I use an Ampeg amp simulator plugin from Universal Audio. So thanks for watching, guys. I really do appreciate you spending some time on my channel. Do remember that there's a link in the description if you'd like to book in for a private one-on-one Zoom lesson. Those are always very productive and I can give you plenty of things to work on. Also, please do ask any questions if you have them down in the comments below, and do like and subscribe, it makes a huge difference. Oh, and check out my Patreon if you get a chance. Alright, thanks guys, I'll see you at the same time next week for something completely different. Take care.